In 1941, the United States had an industrial base that was not fully mobilized yet, but it already had a scale that nobody else on the planet could reach, even if they mobilized 100%. American factories in 1941 produced cars, trucks, refrigerators, washing machines, and many consumer items. When the war started, those same factories simply converted their production lines into military production. For example, Ford built B-24 bombers at the Willow Run plant in Michigan. This factory was completed in 1942 and soon produced one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. This was a speed that the Axis world could not match. The total number of B-24 bombers built was more than 18,400 machines. Germany, in comparison, built around 6,500 Heinkel He-111 bombers, so the difference is extreme. The United States could saturate entire theaters with heavy bombers. This also had a direct effect on strategic bombing campaigns in Europe. For example, in 1944, the USAAF launched massive raids against German synthetic fuel plants in Luna, Mersburg, and Politz. These raids reduced German fuel production by around 80% by fall 1944. Without fuel, the German Luftwaffe fighters like the Bf-109 and FW-190 could not fly many training hours. German pilots arriving in 1944 often had less than 50 to 70 hours total flight training, compared to American pilots who could have more than 200 hours before arriving in combat. This meant that American pilots had better skill simply because they had more fuel available for training. Training hours are also a product of industrial strength, and this translated into results in battles like the Big Week in February 20 to the 25th, 1944, when the USAAF destroyed hundreds of German aircraft in the air and on the ground. American shipbuilding also shaped major campaigns in the Pacific. For example, in 1943, America could support multiple amphibious landings at the same time. The U.S. invaded the Gilbert Islands in November 1943, then the Marshall Islands in January 1944, then the Marianas in June 1944. Japan could not defend each island chain with equal force because their fleet was shrinking. Their carrier pilots were dying faster than they could train replacements. The United States could bring new pilots from massive pilot training programs that had thousands of students at a time. For example, in 1944, the U.S. Navy had around 65,000 aviators. Japan could not train more than a few thousand, and many of these Japanese pilots were inexperienced. The difference also existed in ground forces numbers. The United States mobilized around 16 million men during World War II. Germany mobilized around 18 million, but Germany had to fight the Soviet Union, which mobilized around 34 million. So Germany was in a situation where one enemy alone had twice the manpower, and then America was a second giant. And America had better food, better logistics, more medicine, more penicillin supplies, more trucks, more fuel, more artillery ammunition. For example, the United States produced more than 40 billion rounds of small arms ammunition. Germany produced less. This meant American infantry could always get enough ammo. American artillery output also became decisive in multiple battles. The 105mm M2A1 howitzer was the standard U.S. divisional gun. The United States produced more than 10,000 of these howitzers. Germany never reached such scale with its 10.5cm LEFH-18 howitzer. In the Battle of Normandy in June to August 1944, American divisions could sustain continuous artillery barrages for hours, firing thousands of shells per day. German units could not match this firepower. German memoirs often mention that American artillery felt like a wall of explosions. This fire came from industrial power behind the front line. The U.S. Army used trucks like the GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck. The United States produced more than 500,000 of these trucks. They delivered shells, food, water, fuel, and spare parts. German infantry divisions used horses. In 1941, Germany had around 600,000 horses. Horses cannot move tonnage like trucks. This was why German attacks slowed down in mud seasons. American mechanization kept momentum. In the Pacific, this also mattered. In the Battle of Leyte in October to December 1944, American ground forces moved artillery and supplies inland using trucks and amphibious tractors like LVTs. Japan had limited logistics. Japanese units on Leyte often had no resupply for days. American industry meant that each U.S. soldier had more ammunition, more food, and better medical support. The U.S. mass production of penicillin reduced mortality. In 1943, American factories made 21 billion units of penicillin. By 1944, production was more than 6.8 trillion units. This saved thousands of wounded soldiers. Germany had no comparable mass production. Aircraft output scale can be illustrated with fighters. The United States produced around 15,686 P-47 Thunderbolts, 15,875 P-51 Mustangs, and 13,738 P-40 fighters. Germany built around 33,984 Bf-109s and 20,000 Fw-190s. At first sight, Germany's numbers look large, but Germany had to spread those fighters over multiple fronts: Eastern Front, Western Front, Mediterranean, Balkans, defense of oil fields, defense of Reich airspace. The United States could concentrate fighter strength. In 1944, escort fighters supported bomber streams of more than 1,000 heavy bombers over Germany. The result was systemic destruction of industrial power targets. American bombers in 1944 dropped around 697,000 tons of bombs on Germany. Britain dropped around 585,000 tons. Germany dropped around 75,000 tons in entire war. The difference in mass is industrial difference. The ability to keep producing machines after losing them was also decisive. For example, in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1920-1944, known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the U.S. Navy shot down around 600 Japanese aircraft. Japan could not replace them. The United States replaced losses almost instantly. Japan lost its experienced pilots. Americans still had pilot training programs with thousands of fresh aviators. This was only possible because America had fuel for training flights. Japan did not. In 1944, Japanese aviation gasoline output was so low that many pilots trained with gliders or with engines at idle power. American pilots trained with full throttle, full maneuvers, hundreds of hours. The naval gap can be shown with carriers. The United States built around 24 Essex-class fleet carriers. Germany built 0. Germany never built a functional aircraft carrier. The Graf Zeppelin was never completed. This meant the United States had floating airfields across the Pacific. In battles like the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942 and the Battle of Midway in June 1942, carriers allowed American forces to strike Japanese fleets at long distances. Industrial capacity allowed the U.S. to replace lost carriers quickly. After losing the USS Lexington at Coral Sea and the USS Yorktown at Midway, the United States built multiple new Essex carriers by 1943-44. Japan could not replace the carriers lost at Midway. Japanese carrier air groups never recovered the experienced pilot corps lost there. American tank production scale also mattered. The United States built over 49,000 M4 Sherman tanks. These tanks were simple to manufacture, reliable, and easy to maintain. Germany built around 6,000 Tiger I and Tiger II tanks and around 8,500 Panther tanks. These German tanks had more powerful guns, like the 88mm KWK-36 or the 75mm KWK-42, but they were complex, heavy, expensive, and needed more fuel. American Shermans used the principle of quantity and logistics. A Sherman burned less gasoline and could drive more kilometers per liter. American refineries produced around 200 million barrels of aviation gasoline in 1944. Germany could not reach these fuel levels. Without fuel, even the best tanks cannot maneuver. American armored divisions could operate for days with continuous maneuver because they had the fuel delivered by the Red Ball Express logistics system in 1944. This trucking network moved around 12,500 tons of supplies per day from Normandy beaches inland. Germany never built such logistical highway systems in the West. American submarine output also mattered. The United States built around 288 fleet submarines of the Gato, Balao, and Tench classes. These submarines destroyed around 1,314 Japanese merchant ships and around 200 Japanese warships. By 1945, Japan's entire merchant marine was reduced from around 6 million tons to less than 1 million tons. That means Japan could not move iron ore, coal, oil, bauxite, or food between its islands. The United States used its submarines as strategic weapons. The goal was not only to sink warships, the goal was to collapse Japan's logistics. Japan needed shipping. Without shipping, it was impossible to fuel heavy industry. American submarines used torpedoes like the Mark 14 and later better torpedoes after fixing problems with depth and detonators. When the problems were corrected in 1943, the kill rate increased dramatically. American radar production also changed the war. The United States produced more than 150,000 radar sets. German fighters had primitive radar coverage. American ships could see aircraft at long distance. In the Battle of the Philippine Sea, carriers used radar-controlled fighter direction. American fighters were guided to intercept Japanese raids before they could reach the fleet. This allowed F-6F Hellcats to shoot down Japanese aircraft at long distance. This radar network was a product of industrial-scale electronics manufacturing. The United States had copper, factories, and power. Germany had shortages of copper and strategic metals by 1943. Japan had extremely limited manufacturing base for electronics. They could not mass-produce radar sets. American strategic bombing also destroyed German transportation networks. In 1944, the U.S. Air Forces destroyed around 12,000 locomotives and 350,000 freight cars. This meant Germany could not move coal, steel, weapons, or fuel. In September 1944, Germany's coal delivery system was near collapse, and coal was the base resource for German synthetic fuel. Without coal, the factories could not run. American bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator used the Norden bomb site to increase accuracy. They bombed marshalling yards, rail bridges, and synthetic oil. In the bombing of Ploiești oil refineries in Romania, Operation Tidal Wave on August 1, 1943, the USAAF used massive bomber formations of around 178 B-24s. This raid damaged 42% of Romanian refining capacity. Germany depended on Romanian oil. American bombers cut that source. The same industrial logic also shaped the ground war in Europe. In the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, the German army launched a massive offensive with around 200,000 soldiers and around 340 tanks and assault guns. They wanted to split the Allied armies and capture Antwerp, but Germany had fuel shortages. They relied on capturing Allied fuel dumps. The United States had deep logistics. American units moved tens of thousands of tons of supplies to the front in days. They had trucks, tractors, supply lines, railway deliveries, and air resupply. German units like Kampfgruppe Piper ran out of fuel. Their tanks stopped. American ability to sustain supply prevented breakthrough. American air superiority also came from industry. In 1944, the U.S. Air Forces had around 75,000 aircraft. Germany had around 5,000 available fighters at most. American bombers could fly in daylight protected by fighters like the P-51 Mustang with long-range external drop tanks. Germany tried to answer with jet fighters like the Me-262. This was a very advanced aircraft, but Germany only built around 1,430 Me-262s. The United States built more than that number of one fighter type in a few months. German jets could not reverse the advantage because production was too low and fuel was too limited. The United States built around 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone. Germany built around 39,000. Tank battles also show the industrial gap. In Normandy, American tank units could call air support from P-47 ground attack aircraft. These aircraft had 8.5 caliber machine guns and could carry rockets or bombs. German tanks like Panthers had strong frontal armor, but American airstrikes could destroy them from above. In the Falaise Pocket Battle in August 1944, American and British forces destroyed around 10,000 German vehicles. Most of these losses were caused by artillery and airstrikes. The reason this firepower was possible was industrial scale. American factories like General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford produced thousands of engines, transmissions, and guns every month. American shipyards like Newport News, Brooklyn Navy Yard, and others produced Liberty ships at record speed. A Liberty cargo ship could be built in around 42 days in 1943. In one case, the SS Robert E. Peary was built in 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. This was war industrial theater. Germany lost its submarine fuel and spare parts production capacity due to bombing. German U-boats were hunted by Allied escorts. These escorts came from mass production. America built around 140 Casablanca-class escort carriers. Germany had none.
American steel production in 1943 was around 82 million metric tons. German steel production in 1943 was around 30 million. Japan produced around 7 million. That means America alone produced more than Germany and Japan combined. Steel is tanks, guns, ships, planes, railroads, bridges, ammunition, armor plate. The side with more steel has more machines. American industrial scale also sustained the Soviet Union. The United States delivered around 400,000 trucks to the USSR through Lend-Lease. Without American trucks, the Red Army would have moved slower. The Soviet offensives in 1944, called Operation Bagration, were fast partly because they had American Studebaker trucks. Without them, the Russians would have to move artillery using horses. The United States also delivered thousands of locomotives, millions of boots, and millions of tons of food. American canned meat, flour, and sugar fed Soviet soldiers. This does not deny Soviet bravery, but the logistics difference existed. America was the world factory. The United States' contribution to World War II extended beyond mere numbers of men and machines. It was the integration of air, sea, and land power combined with logistics that allowed American forces to project power across the globe. By 1942, the U.S. Navy had approximately 333 major combat vessels, including battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, and an additional 122 aircraft carriers and escort carriers either planned or under construction. Japan, by comparison, had 10 operational carriers after the Battle of Midway, which had just cost them 4 fleet carriers. The industrial gap meant that the United States could conduct simultaneous operations across multiple theaters, the Pacific, Atlantic, and Mediterranean, with little fear of depletion. This simultaneous projection of force was unprecedented in military history. Air power was one of the most visible indicators of American industrial supremacy. By mid-1943, the United States was producing 3,000 aircraft per month. In total, from 1941 to 1945, American factories produced approximately 297,000 military aircraft. Of these, 15,686 were P-47 Thunderbolts, 15,875 were P-51 Mustangs, and 13,738 were P-40 Warhawks. Germany's total fighter production over the whole war was about 34,984 Bf-109s and 20,000 Fw-190s, spread over multiple fronts, including the Eastern Front, the Mediterranean, and the defense of the Reich. The difference was not just in numbers, but in concentration and deployment. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord with nearly 13,000 aircraft in the air over England and France. American aircraft comprised the majority, providing both strategic bombing and tactical close air support. Close air support had a direct effect on the battlefield. During the Battle of St. Lo in July 1944, American P-47 Thunderbolts flew over 1,000 sorties in a week, dropping napalm and bombs to clear German positions ahead of advancing infantry. The Germans often reported that entire villages were destroyed in minutes and resistance crumbled because American firepower and mobility allowed infantry and armor to advance with unprecedented speed. This was made possible by the integration of air production, pilot training, and logistical support. By 1944, American pilot training programs graduated thousands of aviators per year, each receiving over 200 flight hours before deployment. Germany, by contrast, faced critical pilot shortages. Inexperienced Luftwaffe pilots were often sent into combat with fewer than 70 hours of flight training due to attrition and fuel shortages. Naval operations highlighted the U.S. ability to combine industrial production with tactical execution. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 23–26, 1944, the U.S. Navy deployed 282 warships, including 18 aircraft carriers, to confront Japan's combined fleet. American forces had approximately 1,500 carrier aircraft, supported by cruisers, destroyers, and battleships. Japan could muster only around 800 aircraft, most of them inexperienced. The battle ended in a decisive American victory, effectively eliminating Japan's naval power as a strategic force. Industrial capacity allowed the United States to replace lost ships quickly. While Japan struggled to repair damaged vessels due to limited shipyards and scarce resources, American yards churned out new destroyers, escort carriers, and amphibious landing ships at rates Germany and Japan could never match.
Amphibious warfare demonstrated the coordination of land, sea, and air forces. The landings at Iwo Jima, February 19, March 26, 1945, involved approximately 70,000 American troops supported by over 450 naval vessels and 1,000 aircraft sorties per day. Japanese forces, entrenched in caves and fortified positions, inflicted heavy casualties. Despite this, American industrial and logistical superiority ensured continuous reinforcement of troops, replacement of equipment, and delivery of ammunition and food. The United States produced over 24,000 landing ships, LSTs and LCTs during the war, which allowed multiple operations across the Pacific simultaneously. Japan could not hope to match this capacity. The integration of logistics cannot be understated. In the European theater, the Red Ball Express supplied Allied armies advancing after Normandy with over 12,500 tons of supplies per day, using a fleet of more than 6,000 trucks. These trucks were almost all American-made, primarily GMC CCKWs, and were delivered through ports directly from the United States. Fuel was equally critical. By August 1944, American forces in France consumed approximately 10 million gallons of gasoline per day. Germany, whose synthetic fuel production was crippled by Allied bombing, could not replace losses. Panzer divisions were immobilized due to fuel shortages, which made American tactical air attacks and artillery more effective. Strategic bombing amplified American impact. During the Big Week, February 20 to 25, 1944, American 8th Air Force bombers destroyed nearly 1,600 German aircraft on the ground and in the air, while targeting aircraft factories in Regensburg, Schweinfurt, and Leipzig. The USAF flew more than 3,000 sorties, dropping over 6,000 tons of bombs. The industrial damage was compounded by the fact that Germany had no reserves or alternative production locations. American production continued at record rates. During 1944 alone, American factories produced 96,000 aircraft and 45,000 tanks. These numbers meant that every loss in combat could be rapidly replaced, ensuring sustained pressure on Axis powers. American armor production had a direct influence on the ground war in Europe. The United States produced 49,000 M4 Sherman tanks, while Germany produced approximately 6,000 Tigers and 8,500 Panthers combined. While German tanks were technically superior in armor and firepower, they were fuel-intensive, mechanically fragile, and expensive to replace. The M4 Sherman, by contrast, was mechanically reliable, easier to maintain, and could operate over long distances, thanks to abundant fuel and spare parts. In battles such as Operation Cobra in July 1944, American armored divisions exploited breaches in German lines, advancing tens of kilometers in days. The ability to maintain armored strength, thanks to production and logistics, allowed American forces to sustain offensive operations that German forces could not counter. In the Pacific, American logistics, air, and sea power combined to isolate and neutralize Japanese forces. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 19th to 20th, 1944, American carrier aircraft destroyed around 600 Japanese planes. American carriers launched over 900 sorties, supported by radar-directed interception. Japan could not replace experienced pilots. By the end of the battle, Japan lost nearly all its carrier-based air power. American industrial capacity ensured that damaged carriers and lost aircraft were rapidly replaced, maintaining constant pressure on Japanese forces. American submarines played a strategic role as well. From 1941 to 1945, the U.S. Navy deployed 288 fleet submarines, which sank over 1,300 Japanese merchant ships and more than 200 warships. This blockade reduced Japanese shipping capacity from 6 million tons to under 1 million tons by 1945, crippling Japan's ability to supply its island garrisons, transport raw materials, and maintain industry. American torpedoes, such as the Mark 14, after correction of earlier defects, proved highly effective. Submarine campaigns alone accounted for the destruction of more than half of Japan's merchant fleet, a contribution impossible without America's industrial and training infrastructure.
American production of trucks, landing craft, and logistics vehicles supported simultaneous operations. In North Africa, Operation Torch in November 1942 required the transport of 107,000 men and 15,000 vehicles across the Atlantic. American ports, ships, and trucks made this feasible. In contrast, Axis forces often relied on overextended supply lines and insufficient transport. The difference in mobility allowed American and Allied forces to advance after landings rapidly, overwhelming German and Italian defensive positions. Medical and supply chains were part of the industrial advantage. The United States produced massive amounts of penicillin, enough to supply both American forces and allies. By 1944, penicillin production reached 6.8 trillion units annually. This significantly reduced mortality from wounds and disease, keeping soldiers in combat longer. American canned goods, flour, and sugar delivered through Lend-Lease also sustained Allied forces, including the Soviet Union, while Axis powers faced shortages. American naval firepower was augmented by mass production of ships. Liberty and Victory ships, built in hundreds per year, allowed continuous resupply of troops worldwide. The average Liberty ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo and be produced in just over 40 days in 1943. The rapid shipbuilding rate meant that losses from German U-boats or kamikaze attacks did not prevent operational tempo from continuing. In contrast, Japanese and German shipbuilding could not replace sunk ships, limiting their operational reach. Air superiority was further reinforced by radar and electronics production. The United States produced over 150,000 radar units, allowing early detection of enemy aircraft, naval movements, and coastal defense. Radar-guided interceptions, particularly during Pacific carrier battles, allowed American pilots to engage enemy aircraft efficiently, preserving their forces while destroying enemy assets. American combined arms capability, integrating tanks, artillery, infantry, aircraft, and naval support, allowed a systematic dismantling of Axis defensive positions. In Italy, during the Salerno landings in September 1943,
American forces, supported by over 900 aircraft sorties and naval gunfire, successfully overcame German defenses despite strong fortifications. Continuous resupply and replacement of equipment meant that American forces could sustain operations for months without operational pause, something the Axis could not replicate. The cumulative effect of these factors demonstrates the decisive impact of American industrial, military, and logistical power. The ability to produce, transport, and deploy forces across the globe, maintain constant tempo, and replace losses rapidly allowed the United States to execute multiple complex campaigns simultaneously. Battles such as Leyte Gulf, the Philippine Sea, Normandy, and the Bulge all reflected the convergence of American production, training, and logistical systems, creating a force multiplier that Germany and Japan could not counter. The role of American air power in Europe cannot be overstated. In addition to strategic bombing, tactical air support provided a decisive advantage in combined arms operations. During Operation Cobra, July 25 to 31, 1944, American bombers and fighters saturated German positions with high explosive and napalm ordnance. The USAAF flew over 3,000 sorties in 1 week, delivering over 6,000 tons of bombs. This massive bombardment broke German defensive lines and allowed armored and infantry units to advance rapidly through the hedgerow country of Normandy. German resistance collapsed in part because they lacked adequate anti-aircraft defenses and could not replenish their units quickly enough. The United States, in contrast, had a constant flow of replacements, including tanks, artillery, and ammunition, due to uninterrupted industrial production back home.
American air superiority also manifested in escort missions. P-51 Mustang fighters, introduced in large numbers in late 1943 and early 1944, had the range to accompany heavy bombers deep into Germany. Before the P-51, U.S. bombers often suffered severe losses due to Luftwaffe interception. Once Mustangs escorted bombers, bomber losses decreased dramatically. By the end of 1944, the 8th Air Force reported a bomber loss rate of under 2% per mission, whereas German production and pilot training could not compensate for aircraft losses. This ensured the continued destruction of critical industrial centers, transportation hubs, and oil facilities. For example, the bombing of the synthetic oil plants at Ploiești, Romania, and Leuna, Germany, permanently degraded Axis fuel production, which in turn immobilized German armored divisions and aircraft. On the naval front, the United States mastered amphibious warfare logistics. The capture of Tarawa in November 1943, followed by Saipan in June-July 1944, demonstrated the ability to land, supply, and reinforce tens of thousands of troops on heavily defended islands. Each operation required hundreds of landing craft, dozens of escort carriers, and thousands of trucks and amphibious tractors. The U.S. had produced over 24,000 LSTs, landing ship tank, and LCTs, landing craft tank, by 1945, making simultaneous amphibious operations across the Pacific feasible. Japan, by comparison, lacked the industrial base to replace lost garrisons or reinforce strategic locations. Once the Americans had a foothold, Japanese positions became isolated and vulnerable to sustained bombardment and ground attacks. American submarine campaigns in the Pacific also had a strategic effect beyond direct combat. By sinking over 1,300 merchant ships and 200 warships, U.S. submarines cut Japan's access to essential raw materials, such as oil, bauxite, and iron ore. By 1945, Japanese shipping capacity had been reduced to a fraction of its pre-war levels. The destruction of shipping isolated troops on distant islands, causing shortages of ammunition, food, and medical supplies. For example, Japanese troops on Leyte and Iwo Jima often faced weeks without resupply. American control of sea lanes ensured a constant flow of logistics to frontline units, a decisive factor in sustaining offensive operations across vast distances. The synergy between American air, land, and naval forces was particularly evident in the Philippines campaign, October 1944, August 1945. The liberation of Leyte and Luzon involved coordinated strikes from carrier aircraft, long-range bombers, and ground artillery. American naval gunfire supported amphibious landings, while aircraft interdicted Japanese reinforcements attempting to reach the islands. The combination of superior numbers, continuous supply, and integrated firepower ensured the success of operations despite fierce Japanese resistance. During this period, American forces fielded over 200,000 soldiers, supported by 1,300 aircraft and more than 300 naval vessels, all backed by industrial production that could replace losses almost immediately. Logistics and supply chains remained a constant force multiplier. In Europe, the Red Ball Express transported over 12,500 tons of supplies per day, feeding advancing units, delivering ammunition, fuel, and food. American truck production was unmatched. Over 2.4 million trucks were built during the war. Each U.S. soldier had sufficient rations, medical supplies, and ammunition, enabling continuous operations. Germany and Japan, in contrast, faced constant shortages. German panzer units, for instance, were frequently immobilized by fuel scarcity during the Battle of the Bulge, which prevented potential breakthroughs. American logistics turned strategic plans into operational reality, allowing massive offensives without interruption.
American industrial output also allowed for innovation and adaptation. The United States produced 49,000 M4 Sherman tanks, which were adaptable with various upgrades, including the 75mm gun, 105mm howitzer, and later, the Firefly-style modifications in Europe. While German Tigers and Panthers were more powerful individually, they were difficult to maintain, consumed large amounts of fuel, and could not be replaced quickly. This discrepancy allowed the U.S. Army to sustain armored divisions even after heavy losses. In the Falaise Pocket, for instance, American and British forces trapped and destroyed approximately 10,000 German vehicles, yet U.S. divisions remained operational due to the rapid supply of replacements. American aircraft production also enabled global reach. By 1944, the USAAF had over 75,000 aircraft in service. The production of long-range fighters, bombers, and transport planes allowed the United States to strike targets from England to Germany, from the Central Pacific to Japan. American strategic bombing forced Germany into defensive production, diverting resources to anti-aircraft weapons, repair facilities, and air defense instead of frontline units. In Japan, bombing campaigns destroyed key industrial centers in Osaka, Kobe, and Tokyo, further eroding Japanese capacity to resist American advances. By the end of the war, the sheer scale of U.S. production had overwhelmed Axis industrial and military capabilities. The cumulative effect of these operations demonstrates the integration of American industrial, logistical, and operational power. Aircraft, tanks, trucks, ships, and supplies flowed from the United States to the battlefields at an unprecedented rate. This allowed for sustained campaigns, rapid replacement of losses, and the execution of simultaneous operations on multiple fronts. The battles of Normandy, Leyte Gulf, the Philippine Sea, Iwo Jima, and the Bulge were all shaped by this capability. German and Japanese forces, despite tactical skill and determination, could not match the sheer scale, flexibility, and reliability of American military production and deployment. Furthermore, American support to allies amplified this effect. Through Lend-Lease, the United States provided over 400,000 trucks, thousands of locomotives, and millions of tons of food, steel, and equipment to the Soviet Union, Britain, and other allies. This ensured that even Allied forces operated at higher efficiency than they could have achieved independently. While Soviet bravery and British strategy were significant, the underlying material support came overwhelmingly from American industrial and logistical output, allowing these allies to sustain long campaigns against Axis powers. American naval aviation, strategic bombing, armored divisions, logistics,
and Lend-Lease contributions all combined to create a systemic advantage. The scale and reliability of American production, the ability to replace losses rapidly, and the coordination of multiple forces made sustained, simultaneous operations possible across the globe. By 1945, German and Japanese forces were exhausted, isolated, and materially incapable of resisting further American advances. The integration of all these factors made the United States the decisive power in achieving Allied victory, turning raw industrial and manpower potential into a concrete, unmatchable operational force. The United States' impact on World War II extended beyond production and logistics into operational innovations and tactical doctrines that directly shaped the outcome of battles across multiple theaters. One of the most significant areas was the development and implementation of combined arms operations, which integrated infantry, armor, artillery, and air support into a coordinated system capable of overwhelming enemy defenses. In North Africa, for example, during the Tunisia campaign of November 1942 to May 1943, American forces participated alongside British units to defeat German and Italian troops totaling around 230,000 men, supported by approximately 1,000 tanks and 2,500 artillery pieces. The American Second Corps, consisting of roughly 100,000 soldiers, used American-made M3 Lee and M4 Sherman tanks, in conjunction with artillery and close air support from American P-40 Warhawks. The integration of these elements allowed the Allies to gradually push Axis forces into a shrinking pocket, culminating in the surrender of 230,000 Axis troops in May 1943, marking a clear demonstration of American operational effectiveness.
American tactical innovation also played a decisive role in the Pacific theater. The island-hopping campaigns, starting with Guadalcanal in August 1942 and continuing through the Marianas and Iwo Jima in 1945, required precise coordination between naval bombardments, amphibious landings, and air superiority. At Guadalcanal, American forces fielded approximately 60,000 troops against 32,000 Japanese defenders. American forces utilized a combination of naval gunfire from over 70 warships, aerial bombardment from carrier-based aircraft, and amphibious landing craft to establish beachheads. The effectiveness of these operations relied on the mass-produced landing ships, such as the 1,051 LSTs built during the war, and amphibious tractors, which could carry hundreds of soldiers and vehicles from ships to shore under enemy fire. The industrial scale ensured that multiple simultaneous amphibious assaults could occur, maintaining operational tempo that Japan could not match. Air power integrated into ground operations created a multiplier effect. During the Battle of Saipan, June 15 to July 9, 1944, American forces landed 71,000 troops supported by over 600 naval vessels and more than 1,000 aircraft sorties daily. B-24 Liberator bombers, flying from distant bases in the Marianas, targeted Japanese fortifications, supply lines, and airfields. The combination of strategic bombing and tactical close air support prevented Japanese forces from mounting effective counterattacks. Despite strong fortifications and determination, the Japanese suffered approximately 29,000 casualties, while American forces sustained 3,426 killed and 13,099 wounded. The disparity was facilitated by American industrial and logistical superiority, providing continuous reinforcement, ammunition, and medical support, which allowed sustained operations that would have been impossible without mass production of supplies and equipment. American innovation extended to armored warfare in Europe. The United States developed combined arms doctrines exemplified during the Normandy campaign, beginning June 6, 1944. On D-Day, the American 1st and 4th Infantry Divisions landed at Utah and Omaha beaches with approximately 23,000 men. They were supported by 800 aircraft sorties, 600 naval vessels including 28 battleships and cruisers, and armored units, including M4 Sherman tanks. The landing at Utah Beach encountered moderate resistance, while Omaha faced heavily fortified German defenses,
including 20 to 30 coastal artillery batteries and over 12,000 defenders. American engineering units used portable bridges, amphibious vehicles, and pre-planned artillery bombardments to breach German obstacles. By the end of the day, over 155,000 Allied troops had landed across all beaches, with 23,000 vehicles deployed. The operation's success was predicated on the massive American production of landing craft, armored vehicles, and supplies, as well as meticulous coordination between air, land, and naval forces. The ability to sustain offensive operations deep into enemy territory further illustrates the American contribution. During Operation Cobra, July 25 to 31, 1944, American forces broke out from the Normandy hedgerows, exploiting weaknesses in German defenses. U.S. Army units fielded approximately 1,500 tanks and assault guns, supported by 3,000 artillery pieces and 2,000 aircraft sorties. The Germans, facing fuel shortages and insufficient replacements due to Allied bombing, could not maintain cohesive defensive lines. Within days, American forces advanced 30 to 40 kilometers per day, capturing towns and cutting off German units, ultimately encircling and destroying the German 7th Army in the Falaise pocket. The logistical capability to replace tanks, artillery, and ammunition from stockpiles shipped from the United States was decisive, allowing American forces to maintain relentless pressure on the enemy. In the Pacific, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 19 to 20, 1944, demonstrated the integration of American air, naval, and operational planning. Approximately 1,000 American carrier-based aircraft, guided by radar and coordinated with battleship and cruiser gunfire, faced around 450 Japanese aircraft. The result was the destruction of approximately 600 Japanese planes, including many veteran pilots, effectively eliminating Japan's carrier-based air power. American losses were relatively low, with fewer than the 123 aircraft lost. Industrial production allowed the replacement of any damaged aircraft and carriers within months, ensuring sustained offensive capabilities. Japan, lacking similar industrial capacity, could not replace either ships or trained pilots at a meaningful pace, demonstrating the decisive advantage provided by American industrial and operational coordination.
American logistics also enabled large-scale movements of men and material. In the European theater, the Red Ball Express, operating from August to November 1944, transported over 12,500 tons of supplies per day to frontline units advancing through France. The convoy system relied on over 6,000 trucks, mostly American-made GMC CCKWs, operating continuously. Supplies included ammunition, fuel, medical equipment, and food, allowing frontline units to maintain combat effectiveness while advancing hundreds of kilometers from initial landing beaches. German forces, by contrast, suffered from disrupted rail networks due to strategic bombing and limited truck production, preventing rapid resupply and mobility. Strategic bombing campaigns further illustrate the American effect on the war. During the Big Week, February 20 to 25, 1944, the U.S. 8th Air Force flew over 3,000 sorties against German aircraft production facilities in Leipzig, Regensburg, and Schweinfurt. Bombing destroyed or damaged over 1,600 aircraft and crippled production lines, while American fighter escorts prevented excessive bomber losses. In 1944 alone, the United States produced over 96,000 aircraft, ensuring that each loss could be rapidly replaced. Germany, lacking comparable industrial redundancy and facing fuel shortages, could not recover, leading to a gradual erosion of Luftwaffe capability. American air power thus directly enabled the success of ground operations by neutralizing enemy aircraft and providing consistent close air support. American armored units also showcased tactical flexibility. The 2nd Armored Division, part of General Patton's 3rd Army, in August-September 1944, operated with approximately 1,200 M4 Sherman tanks supported by artillery and close air support. During the Lorraine campaign, American armored units could penetrate German lines, encircle enemy forces, and sustain momentum over extended distances. German armored units, despite superior individual tank design, were unable to replace losses quickly and faced fuel shortages, leading to operational paralysis. American tanks, by contrast, were standardized, mechanically reliable, and supported by abundant spare parts and fuel, allowing continuous operations without interruption. In the Pacific, amphibious operations relied heavily on mass-produced landing craft and naval gunfire. The Battle of Iwo Jima, February 19 to March 26, 1945, involved approximately 70,000 U.S. Marines, supported by 450 naval vessels and 1,000 daily air sorties. Japanese defenders, entrenched in fortified caves, inflicted approximately 26,000 casualties. American industrial and logistical superiority ensured continuous reinforcement and replacement of equipment, including artillery, tanks, and medical supplies, demonstrating the critical role of production capacity in sustaining prolonged operations against determined defenders. American submarine campaigns had strategic impact beyond immediate combat. U.S. submarines, totaling 288 deployed during the war, sank over 1,300 Japanese merchant ships and 200 warships, reducing Japan's shipping capacity from 6 million tons to less than 1 million ton by 1945. The destruction of shipping isolated Japanese garrisons, disrupted supply lines, and limited industrial output. Submarine operations were supported by industrially produced torpedoes, diesel engines, and radar systems, allowing sustained offensive operations. Japan, lacking similar industrial output, could not replace losses, illustrating the decisive influence of American production on strategic outcomes.
The integration of all branches of the military, supported by industrial output, logistics, and innovation, created a systemic advantage. The United States could execute simultaneous campaigns in Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific, maintain continuous pressure on multiple fronts, and sustain operations without pause. Battles such as Leyte Gulf, Normandy, the Bulge, Saipan, and Iwo Jima all reflect this integration. The scale of production, including aircraft, tanks, trucks, landing craft, ships, artillery, and ammunition, combined with training, doctrine, and logistics, provided a decisive and unmatchable operational capability. Furthermore, American support to allies amplified the effect. Through Lend-Lease, the United States supplied over 400,000 trucks, thousands of locomotives, millions of tons of food, steel, and ammunition to the Soviet Union, Britain, and other allies. This material support ensured that Allied forces could maintain prolonged operations and reinforce fronts where the Axis attempted to concentrate forces. While the bravery and skill of Soviet and British forces contributed to victory, the underlying material and logistical base enabling sustained operations was overwhelmingly American. American industrial capacity also provided critical advantages in terms of artillery and heavy firepower. In Europe, the United States produced over 100,000 105mm M2A1 howitzers and over 20,000 155mm M1 long-tom guns. During the Battle of the Bulge, December 16, 1944, to January 25, 1945, American artillery units fired tens of thousands of rounds daily to slow and repel the German offensive. The German 6th Panzer Army, numbering roughly 200,000 soldiers and 340 tanks, initially achieved surprise and penetration, but American artillery, in coordination with infantry, armor, and tactical airstrikes, inflicted catastrophic losses. German units often ran out of ammunition, and many tanks were destroyed or abandoned due to fuel shortages. American artillery, with its high rate of fire, reliable logistics, and mass-produced munitions, turned numerical parity or even German technological advantages into American operational superiority. The development of mobile artillery and combined arms doctrine allowed American forces to conduct continuous advances after breakthroughs. During Operation Cobra, 1,500 artillery pieces, including 105mm and 155mm guns, fired in concentrated barrages against German positions, while 2,000 aircraft flew tactical support missions.
The synchronized attack caused German lines to collapse, enabling armored divisions to exploit openings rapidly. American logistical networks ensured that artillery units could be resupplied continuously with ammunition, enabling sustained fire over days without operational pauses. Germany, suffering from transportation bottlenecks and bombing of rail networks, could not match the tempo, highlighting the decisive effect of American industrial and logistical power in operational outcomes. American infantry also benefited from mechanization and logistics. Trucks, jeeps, and half-tracks allowed infantry to move rapidly with supporting weapons and supplies. During the advance through France after the breakout from Normandy, American infantry divisions could cover 20 to 40 kilometers per day while maintaining firepower, medical support, and supply lines. German infantry, often reliant on horse-drawn transport and depleted by previous campaigns, could not maneuver at comparable speed or sustain operations under continuous Allied pressure. The difference in operational mobility directly influenced the collapse of German defensive positions, the encirclement of units, and the liberation of territory.
The Pacific Theater further illustrated American mastery of logistics and operational integration. The capture of Okinawa, April 1st to June 22, 1945, involved over 180,000 American troops, supported by 60,000 naval personnel, and more than 1,300 ships. Daily air sorties from carriers and land-based aircraft exceeded 1,500. Japanese defenders, numbering approximately 100,000, inflicted 77,000 casualties on American forces. However, continuous reinforcement and resupply ensured that American forces could replace losses and sustain offensive momentum. The scale of American production and transport allowed simultaneous operations in multiple island campaigns, isolating Japanese forces, cutting supply lines, and preventing coordinated resistance. American naval and air superiority also facilitated strategic isolation of enemy territories. In the Pacific, the island-hopping strategy relied on bypassing heavily fortified positions and cutting them off from reinforcements and supplies. American carriers, numbering over 24 Essex-class ships by 1945, provided air cover, strike capabilities, and logistical support. Submarines, numbering 288, enforced a de facto blockade, sinking Japanese merchant shipping and disrupting supply lines. The United States' ability to project force over thousands of miles while maintaining supply chains allowed operations on islands such as Saipan, Guam, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima to succeed where Japanese defenders were numerically strong but logistically constrained. Strategic bombing in the Pacific also played a decisive role. By 1945, American B-29 superfortresses, capable of flying 3,000 miles with heavy bomb loads, conducted firebombing raids on Japanese cities, including Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka. The combination of long-range bombing, naval blockade, and submarine interdiction reduced Japan's industrial output and disrupted internal logistics, weakening the capacity to resist American ground operations. Japan lacked the industrial base to replace losses, while the United States could continue production of bombers, engines, and munitions. By the end of the war, over 50 cities in Japan had been destroyed or heavily damaged, demonstrating the decisive impact of sustained American strategic air power. American medical and support logistics further amplified operational effectiveness. The U.S. Army produced massive quantities of penicillin, medical supplies, and field hospitals. By 1944, production reached billions of units annually, drastically reducing mortality rates among wounded soldiers. Medical evacuation and care allowed American forces to sustain larger numbers of combat troops in frontline service, enhancing operational resilience. In contrast, Axis forces, particularly in Japan and Germany, faced shortages of medicine, food, and medical personnel, increasing non-combat losses and reducing combat effectiveness over time. The cumulative effect of American industrial, logistical, and operational capability was evident in the collapse of Axis defenses. In Europe,
The combination of air supremacy, artillery, armor, infantry mobility, and logistics enabled successive campaigns from Normandy to the Rhine. In the Pacific, integration of naval, air, and amphibious power allowed the systematic reduction of Japanese territory. American forces could sustain simultaneous campaigns across multiple theaters, a feat impossible for Axis powers due to limited industrial capacity, manpower, and logistical flexibility.
American technological and industrial innovations, such as radar-guided intercepts, amphibious landing craft, and mechanized artillery, created a qualitative advantage that complemented numerical superiority. Combined with logistics, training, and doctrine, these innovations allowed American forces to achieve decisive results despite challenging terrain, strong enemy fortifications, and determined resistance. The outcome of battles, from the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, reflected the synergy of American production, planning, and execution. Lend-Lease support further reinforced this effect. Supplies, including trucks, aircraft, artillery, and food, allowed allies such as the Soviet Union and Britain to sustain prolonged offensives. Over 400,000 trucks, thousands of locomotives, millions of tons of food, and millions of rifles and machine guns flowed from the United States to Allied forces. This material support ensured that American strategic advantage extended beyond its own forces, enabling the global Allied coalition to maintain operational tempo and achieve strategic objectives that would have been unattainable without American production. American forces' ability to replace losses quickly, sustain offensive momentum, and project combined arms across multiple theaters established a decisive strategic advantage. In the final campaigns of 1945, both in Europe and the Pacific, Axis forces faced overwhelming firepower, mobility, and logistical support that they could not counter. Germany's final defenses crumbled under sustained air and ground attacks, while Japan's isolated garrisons were systematically reduced despite fierce resistance. American industrial, operational, and logistical capacity proved decisive in shaping the outcome of the war. American armored and mechanized units continued to demonstrate decisive effects through coordinated doctrine and logistical support. During the advance across France in the summer and fall of 1944, American forces relied heavily on the M4 Sherman tank, which was produced in 49,000 units throughout the war. While the German Tiger I and Panther tanks were individually superior in firepower and armor, the Americans used numbers, mobility, and combined arms integration to achieve tactical and operational success. In the Lorraine campaign, for instance, approximately 1,200 American tanks were deployed in concert with over 2,000 artillery pieces and 2,500 aircraft sorties, achieving breakthroughs in heavily defended German positions. German units could not sustain prolonged engagement due to fuel shortages and insufficient replacement tanks, leading to encirclements and retreats. The operational advantage created by American production and logistical support was decisive, turning quantitative superiority into qualitative battlefield success. The Pacific campaigns showcased similar principles. The Battle of Leyte, October 17 to December 26, 1944, involved over 200,000 American troops, supported by more than 300 naval vessels and 1,500 aircraft sorties daily. Japanese defenders, numbering approximately 80,000, were forced into defensive positions on multiple islands. American forces conducted amphibious landings, coordinated naval bombardments, and close air support, systematically reducing Japanese resistance. Losses for American forces totaled approximately 5,000 killed and 36,000 wounded, whereas Japanese casualties exceeded 50,000. The continuous resupply of ammunition, food, and medical equipment, combined with rapid reinforcement and replacement of casualties, allowed the United States to maintain operational tempo and overcome determined enemy resistance. Naval operations continued to highlight the impact of industrial capacity. By 1945, The United States had commissioned 18 Essex-class aircraft carriers, over 200 destroyers, and hundreds of support vessels. The mass production of ships allowed American forces to operate in multiple regions simultaneously, maintain supply lines, and provide air cover for amphibious operations. For example, the Battle of Okinawa, April 1st to June 22, 1945, involved over 180,000 troops and 1,300 ships. Daily air sorties exceeded 1,500, providing both tactical support and interdiction of Japanese reinforcements. The ability to sustain such a massive combined arms operation depended entirely on the scale of American industrial output and logistical planning.
American strategic bombing in Europe further crippled Axis production and mobility. The destruction of rail networks, synthetic fuel plants, and aircraft factories limited German operational flexibility. During the bombing of Leipzig, February 20th, 25th, 1944, American bombers flew 3,000 sorties, targeting aircraft production facilities. Over 1,600 German aircraft were destroyed or damaged, and production lines were disrupted for months. The combination of air superiority and mass production allowed American forces to maintain continuous pressure on Germany, while German forces could not recover their losses. By contrast, American aircraft production in 1944 alone exceeded 96,000 units, allowing rapid replacement and sustained operations. The integration of air, land, and sea forces was particularly evident in amphibious warfare. At Iwo Jima, February 19, March 26, 1945, approximately 70,000 Marines landed on the island, supported by 450 naval vessels and more than 1,000 daily air sorties. Japanese defenders, numbering 21,000, were heavily entrenched. Despite strong resistance, American forces maintained supply lines, medical support, and continuous reinforcements. Over 26,000 American casualties occurred, yet the island was captured. This success was possible because of the mass production of landing ships, tanks, artillery, ammunition, and other support equipment, allowing continuous operational capability even under extreme conditions. American logistics created a strategic advantage across theaters. In Europe, the Red Ball Express delivered over 12,500 tons of supplies daily to frontline units advancing through France. The system relied on over 6,000 American trucks, primarily GMC CCKWs, and required meticulous coordination to maintain fuel, ammunition, and food supplies. German forces, facing disruptions from Allied bombing and limited transport capacity, were unable to maintain mobility or supply, leading to encirclements and operational failures. The ability of American forces to project sustained power directly resulted from industrial production, training, and logistical coordination. Combined arms tactics were reinforced by mechanization and artillery. American divisions could maneuver infantry, armor, and artillery simultaneously across difficult terrain while maintaining firepower. During Operation Cobra, American forces used over 1,500 tanks, 3,000 artillery pieces, and 2,000 aircraft sorties in a coordinated attack. German units constrained by fuel shortages and limited replacements could not counter effectively. The rapid advances following the breakout allowed American forces to liberate large territories, encircle enemy units, and degrade German morale. The systemic advantage of American industrial and logistical capacity turned strategic planning into operational success. American industrial output also ensured continuous innovation and adaptation. The development of specialized landing craft, amphibious vehicles, and self-propelled artillery enhanced operational flexibility. In the Pacific, LVT, landing vehicle tracked, amphibious tractors, allowed troops and supplies to reach beaches under enemy fire, enabling rapid buildup of forces. Over 18,000 LVTs were produced during the war. This allowed simultaneous amphibious operations across multiple islands, isolating Japanese defenders and preventing coordinated counterattacks. The ability to produce these vehicles in large quantities, train crews, and deploy them effectively was a decisive factor in Pacific campaigns. Medical logistics played a critical role in sustaining combat power. By 1945, the United States produced billions of units of penicillin, thousands of field hospitals, and extensive medical supplies. This dramatically reduced mortality and non-combat losses, allowing larger numbers of soldiers to remain effective in combat. In contrast, Axis forces, particularly in Japan and Germany, faced shortages of medicine and medical personnel, reducing operational capability and increasing casualties from disease and untreated wounds.
The cumulative effect of American operational, industrial, and logistical capacity is evident across all theaters. European operations, from Normandy to the Rhine, demonstrate sustained offensives made possible by combined arms, air superiority, and logistics. Pacific operations, from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, show the ability to project power across vast distances with continuous reinforcement. Submarine campaigns, strategic bombing, mechanized armored warfare, and amphibious operations collectively demonstrate the decisive contribution of American forces. The coordination of production, logistics, and operational execution created an advantage that Axis powers could not overcome, ultimately determining the outcome of World War II. American support to allies through Lend-Lease amplified this effect. Trucks, aircraft, artillery, food, and raw materials allowed the Soviet Union and Britain to maintain prolonged offensives, freeing American forces to focus on strategic operations. While Allied bravery and strategy were critical, the material foundation enabling sustained operations derived overwhelmingly from American industrial and logistical output. The United States' ability to produce, transport, and deploy men and machines across multiple theaters simultaneously provided a decisive strategic advantage that no Axis power could match. The final stages of World War II demonstrate the culmination of American industrial, logistical, and operational supremacy. In Europe, after the breakout from Normandy in July 1944, American forces advanced rapidly across France and into Belgium, relying on combined arms operations and massed logistics. The Third Army, under General George S. Patton, moved over 500 kilometers in less than 2 months, a feat made possible by continuous supply through the Red Ball Express. This convoy system, with over 6,000 American trucks operating 24 hours per day, delivered upwards of 12,500 tons of fuel, ammunition, and food daily to frontline units. Such sustained logistical support allowed American divisions, numbering approximately 450,000 men in late 1944, to maintain offensive momentum despite heavy casualties and rapid advances. During the Battle of the Bulge, December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945, American forces faced a surprise German counteroffensive involving approximately 200,000 Axis troops and 340 tanks. Despite initial setbacks, American artillery units, supported by mechanized infantry, armor, and tactical air support, repelled the German advance. American forces fielded over 1,500 tanks, 3,000 artillery pieces, and 2,000 aircraft sorties during the battle. German units were hindered by fuel shortages, disrupted communications, and insufficient replacements due to Allied bombing of transportation and industrial centers. American logistical superiority allowed the delivery of 14,000 tons of supplies and reinforcement of frontline units during the battle, ensuring operational resilience that ultimately turned the tide in favor of the Allies. American air power played a decisive role in both offensive and defensive operations. In the European theater, the 8th and 15th Air Forces conducted strategic bombing campaigns targeting German aircraft production, rail networks, and oil facilities. During Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944, American bombers conducted over 3,000 sorties, destroying or damaging approximately 1,600 German aircraft and halting production lines for months. Escort fighters, including the P-51 Mustang and P-47 Thunderbolt, protected bombers deep within enemy territory, ensuring sustained operational effectiveness. American aircraft production, exceeding 96,000 units in 1944 alone, allowed rapid replacement of losses, a capability that Germany could not match. The combination of air superiority and strategic bombing crippled German mobility, reduced reinforcements, and directly enabled ground advances by American forces.
In the Pacific Theater, American amphibious operations relied on mass-produced landing craft, naval gunfire, and integrated air support. The Battle of Iwo Jima, February 19, March 26, 1945, involved approximately 70,000 Marines landing on the island, supported by over 450 naval vessels and more than 1,000 air sorties daily. Japanese defenders, numbering around 21,000, utilized fortified caves and underground positions. Despite the strong defense, continuous reinforcement, resupply, and replacement of equipment allowed American forces to sustain operations and eventually capture the island, though at the cost of over 26,000 American casualties. The scale of the operation relied entirely on American industrial output, including thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, ammunition, and medical supplies, demonstrating the decisive effect of production and logistics on operational success. American submarine campaigns further weakened Japanese resistance. Deploying 288 submarines over the course of the war, the U.S. Navy sank over 1,300 Japanese merchant vessels and 200 warships, reducing Japan's shipping capacity from 6 million tons to less than 1 million tons by 1945. This blockade isolated Japanese garrisons on islands such as Leyte, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, preventing resupply and reinforcement. Submarine crews trained extensively in navigation, torpedo operations, and communications could conduct extended patrols thanks to reliable industrial production of fuel, torpedoes, and spare parts. The systematic reduction of Japanese logistical capacity directly contributed to the success of American amphibious and ground operations. Naval aviation also had a strategic impact. In the Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 19 through 20, 1944, over 1,000 American carrier-based aircraft faced approximately 450 Japanese planes. American forces destroyed around 600 Japanese aircraft while losing fewer than 123 themselves. American carriers, including the Essex-class and light carriers, provided not only offensive capabilities but also logistical support, radar coverage, and air defense for amphibious operations. Japan's inability to replace experienced pilots and aircraft meant that naval aviation losses were permanent, whereas the United States could rapidly replace losses due to mass production and extensive pilot training programs. This created a decisive qualitative and quantitative advantage that shaped the Pacific War's outcome. American artillery production further amplified battlefield effectiveness. The United States produced over 100,000 105mm M2A1 howitzers and 20,000 155mm M1 guns. During the war, at the Battle of the Bulge, American artillery units fired tens of thousands of rounds daily, suppressing German positions and supporting infantry and armored advances. Mechanized artillery units allowed mobility, enabling them to keep pace with advancing troops and exploit breakthroughs. German artillery, constrained by limited production and fuel shortages, could not maintain comparable sustained fire, highlighting the advantage conferred by American industrial capacity and logistical organization. American armored forces were essential in both Europe and the Pacific. The M4 Sherman tank, with 49,000 units produced, provided reliable, maintainable, and fuel-efficient armored power. Despite being individually inferior to German Tigers and Panthers, Shermans excelled in operational flexibility, coordination with infantry, and rapid replacement. During the Lorraine campaign, 1,200 American tanks, supported by over 2,000 artillery pieces and 2,500 air sorties, breached heavily defended German lines, capturing key towns and encircling enemy formations. The ability to sustain armored operations with continuous fuel, ammunition, and spare parts was a decisive factor in operational success, highlighting the systemic advantage of American industrial and logistical capacity. Medical support and troop welfare further reinforced combat effectiveness. By 1945, the United States produced billions of units of penicillin, thousands of field hospitals, and extensive medical supplies. This significantly reduced mortality rates from wounds and disease, enabling American forces to maintain large numbers of effective combat troops. Axis forces, by contrast, faced shortages of medical supplies and personnel, which increased non-combat attrition and reduced operational capacity. The combination of production, logistics, and medical support ensured that American forces could sustain prolonged offensives across multiple theaters. American logistical capacity extended to strategic transportation and supply networks. The Red Ball Express in Europe and extensive port operations in the Pacific ensured rapid movement of men, vehicles, and supplies. Over 2.4 million trucks were built during the war, allowing continuous resupply to frontline units. Liberty and Victory ships, numbering in the thousands, transported critical equipment and food across oceans. This massive logistical network enabled simultaneous operations in Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific, a feat unmatched by Axis powers, whose industrial and transportation capacity was limited and vulnerable to Allied attacks. The cumulative effect of American production, logistics, and operational coordination is evident in the final campaigns of the war. In Europe, American forces advanced from Normandy to the Rhine, defeating German armies despite determined resistance and fortified positions. In the Pacific, successive amphibious operations and naval campaigns systematically reduced Japanese territory, isolating garrisons and destroying industrial capacity. Submarine campaigns, strategic bombing, armored offensives, and artillery operations all contributed to a decisive and sustained operational advantage, ensuring American forces could maintain continuous pressure while Axis powers were unable to respond effectively. Lend-Lease support amplified the strategic effect of American operations. Over 400,000 trucks, thousands of locomotives, millions of tons of food, steel, and ammunition were delivered to allies, particularly the Soviet Union and Britain. This enabled sustained offensives on multiple fronts, stretching Axis defenses and facilitating American strategic planning. Allied victories were increasingly dependent on the material and logistical foundation provided by the United States, demonstrating that American industrial and operational capacity was not only decisive for its own forces, but for the global Allied coalition. The integration of air, land, and naval operations, supported by industrial production and logistics, created a systemic advantage. American forces could conduct simultaneous campaigns, maintain operational tempo, and replace losses rapidly, enabling the execution of complex strategies. Battles such as Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, the Bulge, Normandy, and Okinawa demonstrate this integration. The scale of production, the efficiency of logistics, and the coordination of forces ensured that American operations were sustainable, relentless, and decisive, ultimately determining the outcome of World War II. The final months of World War II illustrate the ultimate effect of American industrial, logistical, and operational superiority. In Europe, after crossing the Rhine in March 1945, American forces faced German troops depleted by years of combat, shortages of fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. The U.S. 1st, 3rd, and 9th Armies, collectively numbering over 1.2 million men, advanced with more than 3,500 tanks, 4,000 artillery pieces, and 5,000 aircraft supporting operations. Strategic bombing campaigns and ground offensives had already destroyed much of German transportation infrastructure, leaving forces isolated and vulnerable. The coordination of armored, infantry, artillery, and air units allowed continuous offensives, capturing towns, bridges, and key logistical hubs. German forces, despite technological advantages in some weapons, like Tiger II tanks and jet aircraft, could not replace losses at the operational level, resulting in encirclements and mass surrenders.
During the Ruhr Pocket Operation, April 1 to 17, 1945, American and British forces encircled approximately 300,000 German troops. The United States contributed over 2,500 tanks, 3,500 artillery pieces, and more than 2,000 aircraft sorties during this operation. The logistical capacity to supply and reinforce frontline units ensured that the encirclement was maintained and that combat effectiveness was preserved. American forces captured over 25,000 vehicles, including armored units, which Germany could not replace. The destruction of these forces and the capture of industrial areas in the Ruhr significantly accelerated the collapse of Germany. The success of this operation demonstrates how American production, logistics, and operational coordination translated directly into strategic victory. In the Pacific Theater, the Battle of Okinawa, April 1 to June 22, 1945, demonstrated the culmination of American amphibious and combined arms capabilities. Over 180,000 American troops, supported by 60,000 naval personnel and more than 1,300 ships, conducted sustained landings supported by 1,500 daily air sorties from carriers and land bases. Japanese forces, numbering approximately 100,000, were heavily entrenched. Despite fierce resistance, American forces sustained continuous offensive pressure through a combination of artillery bombardments, naval gunfire, and air support. Industrial production allowed replacement of damaged equipment, tanks, artillery, and aircraft, maintaining operational tempo even in the face of high casualties. Over 77,000 American casualties occurred, but continuous reinforcement and supply ensured the eventual capture of the island, critical for launching potential operations against the Japanese home islands. American strategic bombing campaigns intensified in 1945. In Germany, bombing of transportation hubs, oil refineries, and remaining industrial centers in March-April disrupted the movement of German reinforcements to front lines. In Japan, B-29 superfortresses carried out firebombing raids on Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka, destroying infrastructure, manufacturing capacity, and urban areas. By August 1945, over 50 Japanese cities were heavily damaged or destroyed. The industrial and logistical base of the United States allowed continuous production of bombers, engines, fuel, and munitions, maintaining pressure on enemy nations, even as American forces simultaneously engaged in ground operations. Japan and Germany, lacking comparable industrial redundancy, could not recover from these sustained attacks, demonstrating the decisive effect of American industrial capacity on the final outcome. Naval operations continued to demonstrate American strategic superiority. Aircraft carriers, including 24 Essex-class ships by 1945, provided air cover, strike capability, and logistical support for operations across the Pacific. Submarine campaigns, employing 288 U.S. submarines, sank over 1,300 merchant vessels and 200 warships, cutting Japanese supply lines and isolating garrisons. The combination of surface, submarine, and air forces allowed the United States to dominate the seas, ensuring the flow of supplies and reinforcements to frontline troops, while denying the enemy the ability to do the same. Japanese naval losses were irrecoverable due to limited industrial capacity and the destruction of trained personnel, highlighting the critical role of American industrial and operational capabilities. American armored and mechanized operations in Europe maintained decisive momentum. The M4 Sherman tank, with 49,000 units produced, allowed sustained armored offensives across France, Belgium, and into Germany. In the Rhineland campaign, American forces employed over 1,500 tanks, supported by 2,000 artillery pieces and thousands of aircraft sorties. German units, facing fuel shortages, destroyed infrastructure, and insufficient replacements, could not sustain counteroffensives. American logistics ensured continuous resupply of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, allowing armored units to maintain operational speed and effectiveness. The systemic advantage created by production and logistics turned operational challenges into opportunities for strategic success. Medical support and troop welfare also contributed significantly to sustained operations. By 1945, the United States had produced billions of units of penicillin, thousands of field hospitals, and extensive medical supplies, reducing mortality from wounds and disease. This allowed large numbers of troops to remain combat effective and maintain operational tempo, an advantage not shared by Axis forces, which faced shortages in medicine and medical personnel. Combined with continuous replacement of casualties and efficient evacuation systems, American forces were able to maintain larger, effective fighting forces than enemy counterparts in the final stages of both European and Pacific campaigns. American combined arms doctrine reached its peak effectiveness in final operations such as the crossing of the Rhine, the encirclement of the Ruhr, and the capture of Manila, Leyte, and Okinawa. Infantry, armor, artillery, and air units operated in coordinated formations, supported by logistics, and reinforced continuously from industrial production. The operational tempo, force integration, and logistical reliability allowed American forces to conduct sustained offensives, overcoming heavily fortified positions, determined enemy resistance, and complex terrain. These operations highlight the unique American ability to combine industrial, logistical, and operational capacity into decisive battlefield results. Lend-Lease continued to amplify the American effect. Supplies, including over 400,000 trucks, thousands of locomotives, millions of tons of food, steel, ammunition, and firearms, allowed Allied nations such as the Soviet Union and Britain to sustain prolonged offensives. While the bravery and skill of Allied forces contributed to victory, the operational capability enabling these offensives was largely dependent on American material support. This allowed American forces to focus on critical strategic objectives while maintaining coordinated pressure across multiple theaters, demonstrating that the United States provided not only direct combat power, but also the foundation for global Allied success. American tactical innovation complemented industrial and logistical advantages. In amphibious operations, LVTs and other mechanized landing craft allowed rapid buildup on contested beaches. In Europe, mechanized artillery and motorized infantry enabled fast advances after breakthroughs. Combined with extensive air support, these innovations ensured operational flexibility, allowing American forces to exploit weaknesses, encircle enemy units, and maintain momentum. The ability to adapt and integrate new technologies while sustaining production and logistics gave American forces an unmatched operational edge that Axis forces could not counter effectively. The final collapse of Germany and Japan illustrates the cumulative impact of American capabilities. In Europe, the surrender of Berlin on May 2, 1945, followed a series of coordinated offensives in which American forces advanced from the west while Soviet forces pushed from the east. American logistics, industrial output, and operational planning allowed forces to penetrate deep into German territory, encircle large formations, and capture critical infrastructure. In the Pacific, Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, came after the cumulative effect of sustained amphibious operations, strategic bombing, submarine campaigns, and the threat of invasion.
all made possible by American industrial and operational capacity.
The systemic advantage provided by American production, logistics, combined arms operations, and operational planning ensured that the United States could sustain continuous pressure on enemy forces, replace losses rapidly, and coordinate multi-theater operations. Battles in Europe and the Pacific demonstrated that technological superiority alone was insufficient. The integration of industrial output, logistics, and operational execution allowed American forces to achieve decisive results consistently. The collapse of Axis resistance, despite individual acts of bravery and strong defensive positions, highlights that the American contribution was the decisive factor in Allied victory. American forces also leveraged intelligence and technological innovation to amplify operational effectiveness. The use of radar, code breaking, and reconnaissance allowed precise targeting of enemy positions and infrastructure. During the Normandy campaign, intelligence from decrypted German communications allowed planners to anticipate enemy movements, deploy forces effectively, and minimize casualties. In the Pacific, reconnaissance and code breaking enabled accurate targeting of Japanese naval and air units, facilitating decisive victories in battles such as Midway and Leyte Gulf. These capabilities, combined with industrial and logistical superiority, ensured that American operations were both informed and sustainable, maximizing strategic effect. By 1945, the United States had demonstrated the ability to conduct sustained, large-scale operations across multiple continents simultaneously, integrating air, land, and sea power with industrial output, logistics, and tactical innovation. The cumulative effect of these factors allowed American forces to achieve decisive results in battles ranging from the Ardennes to Okinawa, from Leyte to the Ruhr. While Allied cooperation was essential, the decisive contributions of American industrial production, operational planning, and logistical execution were the determining factors in the defeat of Axis powers. The final conclusion is clear. American forces, through the combination of industrial output, logistical mastery, tactical and operational innovation, and sustained combat effectiveness, played the decisive role in achieving victory in World War II. The ability to replace losses rapidly, maintain operational tempo, integrate air, land, and sea forces, and supply allied nations through Lend-Lease created an unmatchable strategic advantage. Axis powers, despite tactical skill, technological innovation, and determination, were unable to overcome this systemic advantage. The evidence of dates, battles, troop numbers, and equipment demonstrates that American contribution was central and decisive in the Allied victory in both Europe and the Pacific.